arguments are underway in Donald Trump's criminal trial in New York City. Allies, a member of his family, accompanied the former president into court today.
This is the time to stop him by voting him out once and for all.
You have to fight for the things that are important to us. Keeping our kids safe from being murdered from crazy people, that should be important to all of us.
Hello, everyone. I'm Weijia Jiang in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. After 2 weeks of jury selection, 22 witnesses, and a month of testimony, lawyers for former President Donald Trump have presented their closing arguments in his criminal hush money trial. The prosecution is now wrapping their case. The former president is also staying on script with his contempt for the court proceedings.
This is a dark day in America. We have a rigged court case that should have never been brought, and it should have been brought in another jurisdiction. As you know, we asked for that, and the judge never allows us anything.
Meanwhile, the White House is calling a deadly airstrike on Rafah devastating and heartbreaking. At least 45 people, including women and children, were killed when an Israeli strike set fire to a camp housing displaced Palestinians. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the strike a tragic mishap. Our Ed O'Keefe is at the White House tonight with the latest on Israel. We start with our Errol Barnett, who is outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Errol, good to see you. The defense hammered away today at Michael Cohen's testimony, really trying to chip away at his credibility. He is the star witness, so tell us about why they are trying, or how I should say, how they tried to do that.
Well, the why, Weijia, great to see you, is because Cohen is the glue between Donald Trump and the payments to Stormy Daniels, as well as the scheme to keep it from the general public as far as the prosecution is concerned. So Todd Blanche, in front of the jury today, came out swinging, coining a lot of phrases, being very animated in front of the jury, where he said Michael Cohen is you've heard the expression, goat. He's a gloat, the greatest liar of all time. He says that Cohen made the decision to pay off Stormy Daniels, and that then he and Daniels worked together to extort Trump for money. Blanche also made the argument that the key piece of evidence at the core of this case, which are the checks made out to Michael Cohen from Donald Trump in the amount of $35,000, where the memo says legal agreement or retainer agreement for legal services, was accurate because there was a verbal agreement between Cohen and Trump for him to be retained as a lawyer, and that because Cohen cannot be trusted, all of the charges against Trump should be dismissed. Let's not forget they've moved for a mistrial many times, while Judge Merchan has denied that effort. But Blanche came out and said basically to the jury, you shouldn't believe anything Cohen has said. So it was their last impression in front of the jury, hoping to plant as much doubt as possible into Michael Cohen's testimony. And
the jury has also heard now from the prosecution that has presented closing arguments. Tell us about their strategy.
Well, what's interesting, Weijia, is initially Joshua Steinglass, who's making the closing argument for the prosecution, he acknowledged that Cohen has in fact lied, but he said, put it in context. What did he lie about? Lying to Congress was to protect Trump, lying about the effort to develop a Trump Tower in Moscow. He pleaded guilty to his role in this scheme and acknowledged that. But he said Cohen flipped on Trump when it became clear that he was being made the fall guy for this hush money scheme, and only then did Cohen turn around and plead his case and admit to his role. Steinglass then step-sided Cohen and said, don't take Cohen's word for it. Look at what everything Cohen said that lined up with other testimony and evidence in the case. Then Steinglass basically started a PowerPoint presentation where he said all of this, starting with a summer of August 2015 meeting in Trump Tower, was part of an effort by men to gain more power and put Trump in office by suppressing negative stories, amplifying negative stories about opponents, and doing this catch and kill scheme. He then laid out text messages, phone calls, audio clips, video clips, and said to the jury, this is the narrative. This is all you need to believe, and you can go ahead and review this material if and when you need to. But it was the reason, he says, the suppression of these stories was the reason Trump was elected in 2016. And he said, generally speaking, Donald Trump corrupted those around him, and if they weren't loyal to him, they were effectively kicked out, and Trump has done everything in his power to cover it up. On the question of, well, how does this impact an election, and is this election interference, Steinglass was clear, and that the payments and repayments were part of an illegal corporate campaign contribution made by the publisher of the National Enquirer, done in collusion with the Trump campaign. And for those reasons, these 12 jurors must find Trump guilty on all counts. So obviously, two starkly different characterizations we're watching in the courtroom behind me. And the expectation is things may go late today so that the prosecution can finish those closing arguments.
And soon, Errol, those jurors will be poring over all of those pieces that you just laid out. Thank you so much for your reporting. Now let's turn to our Ed O'Keefe. He's at the White House tonight covering the latest on this weekend's deadly strike in Rafah. Ed, the international criticism for Sunday's attack in Rafah has been swift. It has been widespread. And the White House has called the strike heartbreaking, but also says it won't change any U.S. policy because of it. Today, you asked John Kirby about why. What did he have to say?
Yeah, Weisha, good to see you on something completely different. You're right. The condemnation pretty swift from around the world. Here at the White House, criticism and concern about the death of those civilians, but no change in policy, in essence, because it was an airstrike, not a major ground offensive that led to the deaths of those dozens of civilians. Take a listen to the exchange with John Kirby. How many more charred corpses does he have to see before the president considers a change in policy?
We don't want to see a single more innocent life taken. And I kind of take a little offense at the question. No civilian casualties is the right number of civilian casualties. And this is not something that we've turned a blind eye to, nor has it been something we've ignored or neglected to raise with our Israeli counterparts, including, Ed, this weekend as a result of this particular strike. Now, they're investigating it, so let's let them investigate it and see what they come up with.
But the president doesn't have like a personal limit to this?
The president has been very clear and very direct about what our expectations are for Israeli operations in Rafah specifically, but in Gaza writ large. We don't support, we won't support a major ground operation in Rafah, and we've, again, been very consistent on that. And the president said that should that occur, then it might make him have to make different decisions in terms of support.
So again, there you see them defending the current policy, but over the course of the briefing, a series of questions about this. In essence, Kirby kept saying, look, because it was an airstrike, as deadly as it was, perhaps because now of a secondary blast that was caused to lead to this explosion that we see there on camera, and not some other major offensive launched by the Israelis into Rafah, that is still considered acceptable, despite the civilian casualties. They point out there were strikes like this in recent days and last week targeting various Hamas leaders that didn't lead to civilian casualties. So in essence, they're being consistent with what was being carried out last week.
You're right, Ed, that they have made this distinction between a ground offensive versus an airstrike, but they've also said that the line depends on how densely populated an area is. Yep. And how many civilian casualties there are. And they have said from the beginning that they've told Israel to limit civilian casualties. But with these two strikes in the last several days, there continues to be mounting pressure for them to do something different. Are there any indications that it will?
As of today, no. But you're right. Between domestic political pressure from fellow Democrats and others concerned about this, from world leaders, most notably the French president, Emmanuel Macron, who in English was decrying what happened over the weekend, not in French, in essence trying to make sure the rest of the world was seeing this. There is, obviously pressure on the president to do this. But as of now, they made clear here at the White House and at the Pentagon, no change in policy despite those civilian deaths. Weisha.
All right. Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much. The lawyers present their closing arguments in Donald Trump's criminal trial. We've got our panel of reporters standing by to take a deeper dive. You are streaming America Decides. Former President Trump was defiant ahead of closing arguments today. Speaking at the courthouse, he blamed President Biden for his legal troubles in New York. Shelby Talcott and Hugo Lowell joins us now. Shelby is a politics reporter for Semaphore, and Hugo is a political investigations reporter for The Guardian. It's great to see you both. So Shelby, tell me how Trump is framing the trial now that it is almost over.
Well, Donald Trump has been pretty consistent throughout this entire trial in framing it as this is all, not just this trial, but all of his legal issues are politically motivated by the Biden campaign. And we've heard that from Donald Trump. We've heard that from his surrogates. We've heard that from his campaign. And so what we saw this morning was really a continuation of what we've heard this entire trial, which is this is unfair. I've done nothing wrong. This is all politically motivated because it's an election year and I am running against Joe Biden. And this is what we heard too when he was president and faced some questions as well. So, Hugo, I want to ask you about the defense's closing argument today because you've been closely following what's happening there. What do they want the jury to take away from this case? What is their final message to them?
Yeah, I think there are three big points. Number one, that it was Michael Cohen who falsified the records if there was any falsifying to be done. You know, he submitted the invoices to the Trump organization, and it was as a result of his invoices that there was this cascading effect of all these other entries being entered into the Trump organization's ledger. Number two was the fact that there was no object crime. There was no second crime, which is what prosecutors have to show in order to get a conviction on falsifying business records in the first degree. Prosecutors have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump had an intent to commit the second crime, and basically Todd Blanche was making the case that there was no intent to commit a second crime. There was no intent to commit a crime whatsoever. And then lastly, there was this point about Michael Cohen and how anything he said was not believable because he has a track record of lying about things both meaningful and not meaningful, and that he lies with abandon whenever there is an interest to him, whenever it suits himself.
Well, not far from where Hugo is standing, Shelby, the Biden campaign was also there today as all of what he just laid out was unfolding. They were there with some star power, with Robert De Niro, with officers on January 6th. Can you talk about why?
So when you talk to the Biden campaign, they said that this had nothing to do with the fact that there was a trial going on. And in fact, the majority of the comments made by Biden surrogates were not about the trial. They were about January 6th and the argument that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. At the same time, of course, it's notable that they were in front of the trial. They claim that that was simply because that's where all of the media is. And so I think that indicates to me, though, that, you know, the Biden campaign has really been struggling to figure out the perfect way to work around these trials. And these trials are taking up so much energy and so much oxygen for Trump. Even though it is an inherently negative thing to be on trial, the end-all be-all is that Donald Trump is getting all of the media attention. So they came to New York, where all of the media was, and sort of stirred up this drama, and then talked about Donald Trump being a threat to democracy, which is really their core argument right now as to why voters should vote for Joe Biden over Donald Trump.
And of course, it's not just this trial. Hugo, I want to shift to another trial where the classified documents are at the center. And the judge rejected the special counsel's request to limit Trump's speech on this. So can you talk about what impact that might have on the case?
Yeah, so away from New York, we have the separate case, the classified documents case in Florida. And over the Memorial Day weekend, the special counsel's office, led by Jack Smith, filed this motion to effectively prevent Trump from making false statements about the FBI's use of force when they went into Mar-a-Lago to retrieve the classified documents they had issued a subpoena for. And basically, Trump had been claiming on Truth Social and elsewhere that Biden essentially wanted to assassinate him and that the allowance of the use of force was indicative of that. Special counsel's office pushed back and said, well, you know, this was our standard use of force policy across all of our operations. And when the special counsel filed this, they filed this on Friday night, the Friday before Memorial Day. And Trump responded in this pretty aggressive fashion to say, well, you know, this is not a proper conferral with defense counsel, and as a result, we want sanctions. And Judge Cannon actually endorsed Trump's motion in this case. And they basically said, you know, in the future, if there is not a meaningful conferral, I am not going to allow you to file these motions, and as a result, kind of admonish the special counsel, despite it was the fact that Trump was making the inflammatory remarks.
Well, Trump has been talking a lot, both at where you are and anytime he really gets a chance. So I want to ask you, Hugo, about how he's clearly using these trials as part of his campaign strategy now that we are so close from Election Day.
Yeah, this was something that the Trump campaign gamed out months ago. They knew that Trump was going to be stuck in a courtroom for the entire day, 4 days a week in this New York criminal trial. And as a result, they had to come up with ways to basically dominate the airwaves. And he knew that by virtue of him being on trial, being in a courtroom, that he'd be able to suck up the media oxygen. But he goes further, right? Like on the days that we're not in trial, we had a number of days last week when we were down from trial. He is using his platform, whether it's through social or at rallies, to talk about the things he wants to talk about. Kind of framed in the correct way or not, it gives him a lot of oxygen. And I think the insinuation that Biden wanted to assassinate him was exactly that. It was trying to play to the media and to try and get them to kind of talk about the claims that he wanted to make.
All right. Hugo Lowell and Shelby Talcott, thank you both for spending some time with us today. Former President Donald Trump's lawyer called Michael Cohen the MVP of liars. CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson will break down closing arguments next. You're streaming America Decides. We are in the final phase of Trump's criminal hush money trial. The former president's legal team wrapped up their closing arguments earlier today. CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson joins us now. Jessica, thank you for being here. Can you talk about the strategy for the defense today? Clearly, they wanted to disparage Michael Cohen's credibility, and I wonder how you think they did.
So I think they did about as well as they could in the sense that they said Michael Cohen is key to this case, and he is somebody who you cannot trust. He's not just a liar, but he's somebody who, if he's going to lie, it's going to be about this because he wants revenge. He hates this defendant. And so the defense spent hours saying in a variety of different ways, sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly, Michael Cohen is a liar, and Michael Cohen is the thing that connects any alleged criminal wrongdoing to the former president. Now, whether or not that lands with the jury, I don't know, because I think the prosecution also had a very good response to that.
Well, this is a man who also admitted he was a thief on the stand. So in addition to everything you just laid out, how is the prosecution going to respond to that? And what can they tell jurors in these final moments to make their case?
So I think a couple of things. One, with respect to Michael Cohen, the prosecution, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the reporting out of the courtroom indicates that they said something like, we didn't buy him from the witness store, okay? We know he's not perfect. We know that he's lied, but let's think about his motivation in this particular case. And then what the prosecution seems to be pivoting to, which I think is really important, is actually Michael Cohen isn't key to the case. Think about everybody else you heard from. Think about David Pecker. Think about the evidence that you saw and think about what makes sense. Over and over again, the prosecution's going to say, not only were the things that Michael Cohen said corroborated, but think about the story that we told you. Does it make more sense that Michael Cohen in this moment would be lying and would make up, frankly, a story that in and of itself has problems, which if you're going to lie, you probably want an airtight story? Or does it make sense that everybody else is telling a consistent story of trying to, and here's the prosecution's theme, undermine the election, bury this story of the alleged affair so the voters didn't hear about it?
And of course, jurors will try to answer that question soon. What can we expect from deliberations, and how soon could there be a verdict?
So I will say the faster the verdict comes, I think the better it is for the prosecution. Now, this is the first moment that the jurors are going to be able to go back and talk about the one thing they all have in common, which is that they're sitting as jurors on this historic case. They'll go back to the jury room, they'll elect a foreperson, they'll take a vote to see about where they are on this case. And then depending on where they are, we could hear very quickly. If this is a hung jury, then this is going to drag out for days. But one thing to note, I think Judge Merchan, if they say we can't come to a conclusion, I think Judge Merchan will send them back and say, keep trying. He doesn't want this to end in a mistrial.
And if Trump is convicted, what could sentencing look like for the former president?
So this is interesting because the defense said today in closing arguments, don't send this man to prison. And Judge Merchan actually had to give a clarifying statement to the jury where he said, sentencing is up to me. And part of that is because it's not at all a fait accompli that there would be a prison sentence in this case. This is a nonviolent crime, first-time offender. And so what would happen? One, there would be a sentence that may or may not include prison time. And two, you better believe if there's a conviction, there will absolutely be an appeal. And there are a couple of live issues, frankly, for an appeal.
And is there the possibility that we see handcuffs on the former president, that we see him being led away as he's processed?
So it is possible. I will say we're working a little bit without a net in the sense that this is not a typical defendant. You and I don't talk about the typical case. We're talking about this case because it involves the former president. And so decisions that involve whether or not to take him back handcuffed, to process him and put him in custody, I think those are decisions where history does not give us a huge amount of guidance, frankly.
That's right. This is a historical case. Thank you, Jessica Levinson, for all of your input.
The fight for a lot of us didn't end on January 6th, that evening when we went home. The fight still continues now.
From former Capitol Hill police officer Harry Dunn to Robert De Niro, it was more than just the lawyers making their case today. The political posturing and closing arguments meet up in Lower Manhattan. You're streaming America Decides. The courtroom and the campaign colliding today. Lawyers presented their closing arguments in the Trump criminal trial, while supporters of President Biden were right outside the court. Our Robert Costa joins us now from outside the courthouse. Robert, it's great to see you. Of course, Donald Trump has been spending a significant amount of time inside the courthouse, and I wonder how it's impacting his presidential campaign.
Well, it's evident, Weija, that his campaign is here in Lower Manhattan. It was earlier today that I was speaking to several of his top advisors, Jason Miller, Stephen Chung, among others. They are all here, along with members of the Trump family. They see this as a real political moment for them to try to get their bearings ahead of the first debate, ahead of the convention, and to reassure Republicans nationwide that while he is facing a criminal trial, he's still running for the White House. And he showcased throughout this trial his solidarity with so many Republicans, including the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who was here just steps away weeks ago.
And today, Robert, we also saw the Biden campaign making a rare appearance outside the courthouse, which certainly felt a little off-brand. It had a lot of Hollywood star power. And you spoke with actor Robert De Niro. What did you ask him?
I did. I had a chance to speak with the Academy Award winner, who was also President Biden, just did the voiceover for a recent Biden campaign advertisement. And I said to Mr. De Niro, do you believe you're going to break through with this appearance here with everyday voters who might not pay attention to this trial or to politics or the latest headlines? And he said, well, he hopes he does. He doesn't have some kind of overwhelming confidence that he believes one appearance here is going to change the stakes of the campaign. But he did say that he's trying to bring the issue of democracy to the fore. He really believes, and this echoes the Biden campaign's message, that former President Trump is a threat to American democracy, has authoritarian, even dictator-like persona, policies, ideology. And De Niro underscored that with his remarks today, standing alongside the spokesperson for the Biden campaign, along with other Biden surrogates. And it sent a message that the Biden campaign was coming here. And I asked the Biden campaign spokesman, Michael Tyler, why are you here? And he said, because you are here, meaning the media. The media is covering this trial. The Biden campaign believes it's in the mix when it comes to the battleground states, but it wants to be in the mix against the presumptive Republican nominee by showing up on this terrain.
And it has become a hot spot on the campaign trail. I wonder how Trump's team responded to this latest move by the Biden team.
They had a press conference right after the Biden press conference. There was almost a surreal American political and entertainment moment. You had Robert De Niro walking away with bodyguards and officials while the Trump campaign came up to the microphones and mocked his movie career in Lower Manhattan near De Niro's home, while the former president sat in the criminal courthouse behind me across the street. Something you rarely see on the presidential campaign trail, but it's really a microcosm of what this trial is all about. It's a legal battle that's unfolding right now with the closing arguments, but there is a broader political battle that is playing out. And this is really laying the groundwork for a summer campaign where you see the Biden campaign already ready to shine a spotlight on former President Trump's conduct and their belief that he is a threat to American democracy. And you see the Trump campaign, meanwhile, mocking the Biden campaign time and time again.
Robert, it's always great to have your reporting, and today certainly did feel like a made-for-TV moment. It was very real, and we appreciate you covering it for us. Joel Payne and Matt Gorman join us now. Joel is a CBS News political contributor and a Democratic strategist. Matt is a Republican strategist who served as a senior advisor to Senator Tim Scott's presidential campaign. Thank you both for being here. So, Matt, I want to start with you because the former president has said no matter what happens, no matter what the verdict is, he doesn't think it's going to impact his campaign. Is he right?
The polls show he is. I mean, I think we're right now so baked in. There's an NBC News poll out last month, about 42%. So they would vote for him one way, 40% another way. So really, I think in large part, this verdict won't really have much of an effect one way or another. There will be other issues at play in the campaign, but this is just something that I think will reinforce one way or another in voters' minds.
And Joel, do you agree with that? Because, you know, he could be convicted and he still says no big deal.
I think he is thinking about that from a primary mindset, right? If we're still in the Republican primary, I think Matt's probably right. I think that Republican primary voters have made it very clear that Donald Trump's criminality, or maybe lack thereof or whatever, doesn't really factor into their vote. I do think when you're talking about a general election, a really close election where 10,000, 20,000 votes moving could make the difference. I do think that in an event like this, where maybe you have a former president that's being convicted of a crime, a felony, would impact his status in the polls. But it also depends on how it's narrated. And I think, you know, getting to the narration part, you talked about Robert De Niro. I heard your conversation with Bob there. It reminds me, in 2016, I worked for the Hillary Clinton campaign. We had an ad where we had Morgan Freeman narrate it, right? And campaigns do this type of stuff all the time. And you do that because you want to draw attention to something. You want people to start to think about it. That's why you put an A-list Hollywood celebrity in the middle of Manhattan on a hot, almost summer day, is because you want people to pay attention to it. And I think that's what the Biden campaign wanted to do. And also Bob's point about what Michael Tyler said, that you're here because I'm here, because I, the media, am here. I think the Biden campaign is trying to make an implicit point that this is what the media is covering, and somewhat submission to the 24/7 cycle that we're in this cycle at this moment.
But Matt, they also have to admit that they are now following the Trump campaign and meeting the former president where he is in order to get their message across, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, the cameras are there, the media is there, the spectacle, you're covering it, right? Would it be easier if they had done it in Washington? I mean, logistically, maybe, but that's not where the media circus is. I think this was the first in a long time, kind of the first action we've seen with the Biden campaign, in a way, kind of tacitly admitting that they don't have the momentum at the moment. It was a little bit of a scrappier move, a little bit of an underdog move. I think for a large part of this campaign, the Biden campaign has been running it as if they're ahead. And I think, look, most polls show, at least if it were today, Trump would have an advantage over Biden. So I think this move is a little bit scrappier. It showed they're willing to go out of the box a little bit in a way we haven't seen before.
We're in basketball season. If this is a basketball game coming out of halftime, Biden campaign probably thinks they're down 5 or 10 points. They have to do something to change strategy. I think Matt's point's a good one there.
Well, and also to your point that, you know, this trial itself might not be one of the deciding issues they're trying to make, they being the Biden campaign, January 6th, an issue. And we did hear from not only De Niro, but also former Capitol Hill police officers. I'm going to take a listen to one of them.
Donald Trump is the greatest threat to our democracy and the safety of communities across the country today. He has encouraged and continued to encourage political violence.
When I went to Arizona and spoke with undecided voters and I asked them if democracy is on the ballot, they said that's just a talking point. Is this issue on the ballot, Joel?
Well, I think depending on where you are, right? I think in certain places it's going to resonate more. I think the president and his team, President Biden's team, think it is something that's on the minds of voters in a place like Arizona, maybe in a place like Georgia. It might not be that way everywhere across the map, but it is going to be something that you know is going to resonate with your base. And I'd say one of the things that the Biden campaign, again, to the point that Matt was making, has not done as good of a job as the Trump campaign is consolidating their base. And so talking about democracy, along with other issues like abortion, is going to do that base consolidation that I do think that the president and his team are acknowledging they need to catch up and do a little bit better job of.
I think it was worth pointing out, too, Harry Dunn recently ran for Congress in Maryland. I believe it was an Annapolis seat, was endorsed by a lot of the Democratic leadership, including Pelosi and others, got a lot of money behind him. It didn't work. He ran on those similar talking points. Who did win? Someone who talked a little bit more about abortion and that sort of issue. It was a deep blue seat, but to your point, those two issues unite the primary vote a lot more than the general election vote.
And also, I want to ask you, Matt, because Senator Tim Scott spoke over the weekend. He was asked about Trump's false claim that FBI agents were locked and loaded during the Mar-a-Lago search, because, of course, that is another case that we are following. I want to hear what Senator Scott had to say and ask you about it on the other side.
I haven't found myself agreeing with Attorney General Garland on any issue. I will say I saw the video of the SWAT team from the FBI raiding Mar-a-Lago. I have not seen the same video of them raiding Joe Biden's garage. So I'd love to have that comparison. But more importantly, once again, we find ourselves reinforcing this two-tiered justice system.
What do you make of his decision not to fully condemn that rhetoric that we heard from Trump?
I mean, look, he has said a lot of that throughout the course of his campaign. It's really no different. And I think, Joel and I were talking a little bit, too. I think over the last 10 years, I think if Democrats kind of making a lot of hay about what kind of Trump says on one thing or another, it's a lot of it so much is baked in. We've had 4 years of President Trump. What is new, for instance? Abortion. That is something that they've seen electoral success on in recent years. But I think I would caution Democrats. Look, I worked for Jeb Bush. I wrote a lot of the talking points Hillary ended up using in 2016 initially when I was in the primary. By saying, Donald Trump says this, can you believe what he said now? He's not the nicest guy. It's baked in a lot of respects. And I think even in some respects, people will say, yeah, that might all be true, but I want to be able to afford a home, buy cheaper groceries and the like. So what are some things that haven't worked for Republicans recently? Talking about abortion and the like, that might be more fruitful for Democrats.
Well, I know he's your former boss, but I have to ask you whether he's in the mix for VP or not.
I mean, I read what you guys read. I mean, look, I worked for him. I wanted his name at the top of the ticket, but I'll settle for the second line, too.
But is he?
I have no knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah,
I told Matt he should maybe start measuring some drapes, maybe some executive office buildings, maybe.
You never know.
Yeah.
Joel, I want to ask you about what's happening in Ohio, because the Biden-Harris campaign, they're already taking steps to make sure that the president will be on the ballot. What do you make of that?
Well, it looks like the DNC is going to virtually nominate President Biden to make it ahead of this Ohio ballot deadline. One, obviously, they want to signal to Ohio Democrats that President Biden's going to be there and he's going to be competitive. By the way, abortion is an issue that's in the air in Ohio. So while is it realistic to think that Democrats could turn Ohio back blue this cycle? It's probably a stretch, but you certainly want to make Republicans defend that territory. And so it's important for Democrats to signal to their base and to their supporters that they're all in there. And I think that a part of what we're seeing is just the president and his team trying to give that affirmation to his folks.
Competitive Senate race, too. They need Biden on the ballot to help Sherrod Brown have a chance at winning.
Yeah.
Yes, it's an excellent point. And I wish I could talk to you all afternoon, but I'm sorry we have to leave it there. Joel Payne and Matt Gorman, thanks for your time. Well, the corruption trial of Senator Bob Menendez resumed in a Manhattan federal courtroom today. This is week 3 of the trial. The Democratic New Jersey senator is facing charges of bribery, fraud, and obstruction of justice for accepting gold bars and cash from foreign governments. Today's testimony had to be delayed after a juror went missing. Juror number 12 returned to court this afternoon after receiving stitches for an injury sustained over the holiday weekend. Menendez has maintained his innocence. A stunning announcement from Melinda French Gates as the philanthropist puts her money at work. A look at which groups are set to share the $1 billion, yes, with a B, she plans to give away. You're streaming America Decides. Billionaire philanthropist Melinda French Gates is planning to donate $1 billion over the next 2 years to various organizations and individuals working on behalf of women and families. Some of that money includes support for reproductive rights. French Gates made the announcement in a New York Times op-ed Tuesday morning. This is her first solo donation since announcing her departure from the Gates Foundation, which is set to happen on June 7th. Caitlin Huey-Burns joins us now for more. Caitlin, it's great to see you. So a significant amount of this money is going to reproductive rights organizations. Can you tell us about what kind of impact it will have?
Yeah, so about $200 million of this $1 billion are going to over a dozen groups that are focused on women's rights, advancing women's rights. And a large section of this is dedicated to reproductive rights. So the Center for Reproductive Rights is getting a decent amount of this money. And what's interesting is that Melinda French Gates, in announcing this, said that she's been working on these issues globally for such a long time. But the fall of Roe v. Wade really kind of crystallized for her the demands here in the United States. She noted that in 14 states, women have, little to no access to abortion rights, and that kind of changed her perspective. She also says, as a grandmother to a 1-year-old, she's worried that her granddaughter has fewer rights or would have fewer rights than she does. So kind of bringing these issues domestically, but really since the fall of Roe, and also the idea that, a lot of these organizations are working on a lot of different things related to women's rights. So while reproductive rights are the bulk of it, she's also funding organizations that help domestic workers, those who champion paid leave, kind of noting that paid leave is not, guaranteed in this country, of course. But when it comes to reproductive rights, she also notes just the sky-high maternal mortality rate, but especially among Black women and women of color as a way to address this.
And you have covered so extensively how some women don't have options, and then the options they do have require funding and money. So you mentioned that a large tranche of this is going to other things as well. Can you elaborate about what else she is giving money to, and who else, I should say?
Yeah, who else? That's the important part of this, too, because she's trying to kind of re-envision how to give money to these organizations. So she identified about a dozen people who she is going to give grants to, and they are going to fund organizations that are in line with this mission. So Allison Felix, for example, is someone on this list. She's a decorated Olympian, of course, really focused on these issues of maternal mortality, especially among Black women. The former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, is also on this list. Another person on this list is someone who's been working with Afghan women. Melinda Gates mentioned that it's been since the Taliban took over, it kind of reversed 20 years of progress for women. So still kind of thinking globally here with some of these initiatives. And she also announced that later this fall, they're going to release another tranche of this money to focus on women's mental and physical health. But this is $2 billion over the next 2 years. And when she announced that she was leaving the Gates Foundation, she's pivoting to her own firm that's called Pivotal Ventures. And she was able, as part of her divorce agreement with Bill Gates, take $12 million and be able to fund her philanthropic endeavors that are focused on women.
And since you cover so much politics, is this a political statement in any way?
Well, I think, since she acknowledged that the fall of Roe was a direct impact and really guided her in this, kind of recognizing that, she essentially said that these organizations are on the defense and she wants to be able to put them on offense.
Well, $1 billion will certainly give them a good start. Yeah. Thank you so much, Caitlin Huey-Burns. It's primary runoff day for Republicans in Texas. How a gun safety vote could impact Congressman Tony Gonzalez's reelection bid against a popular gun rights YouTuber. We'll take a closer look at that race next on America Decides. Texas Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez is fighting to keep his seat in a GOP primary runoff. He faces Brandon Herrera, a gun rights YouTuber with more than 3 million followers. The Texas Republican Party censured Gonzalez last year over his vote for gun safety legislation that was backed by the White House. CBS News politics reporter Hunter Woodall joins us now. Hunter, it's great to see you. So talk to me about how much gun laws and gun legislation is going to play a role in this race.
In this runoff, gun safety, gun laws has been just a paramount issue. I mean, this is a district that has Uvalde, where of course that 2022 school shooting rampage was. After that rampage, Representative Gonzalez voted for gun safety legislation. He was one of only few House Republicans to do that. That has become a major issue in this race. As you talked about, his challenger in this runoff is somebody who talks about being a Second Amendment activist. He talks about being a firearm manufacturer. So there's a huge contrast on that issue in this primary runoff.
And as you just mentioned, Gonzalez voted in favor for some gun reform. Is that going to backfire?
I mean, you're already seeing this being one of the things that frequently gets mentioned. He has a more bipartisan voting record than many Republicans we see in the House these days. He not only voted for that gun safety package, he also had voted to try and create a January 6th commission way back when, again, not with that many Republicans. He voted in favor of a same-sex marriage bill in the past as well. Those are votes that obviously get attention, but it's really that gun safety legislation that continues to get a lot of the ire from some conservatives in the Texas GOP.
And what about his voting record on the border? We saw a special race for New York 3 earlier this year, and we saw border security was a huge issue. And George Santos's seat, which obviously was a Republican, was taken by a Democrat who really leaned into border security. So tell me about how he has voted before and whether the Republicans' failure to do something on the border bill so far will hurt him.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at Representative Gonzalez, he's more that kind of pragmatic Republican. He doesn't mind, voting with Democrats. He doesn't mind, kind of getting the ire of his own party. And the border is a very difficult topic. His district is a massive district along the southern border in Texas. And he's, advocated for, more of that sensible legislation. But he's also caught, the ire of other conservatives. I mean, just today, Representative Chip Roy, a fellow Republican, was on Steve Bannon's program criticizing Representative Gonzalez over his record on the border for not backing, Roy's, more conservative border bill a little while ago. And that's a problem for him. That's why you see this building momentum amongst conservatives saying, hey, I don't like where Gonzalez is on the border. But he's popular in this district. He won overwhelmingly in the 2022 general election, around 17 points. So he obviously does know his district and tends to be trying to vote that district, it seems.
And we talk on this show a lot about how slim the majorities are in Congress. Can you talk about how this particular race could impact the balance of power?
Absolutely. Like I said, I mean, Gonzalez won this district by 17 points in the 2022 midterms. It's a district that, obviously a little bit more Republican than, it's not a swing district, it's not a battleground district. But if Gonzalez loses to Herrera in this runoff, that's a very different dynamic. Herrera has talked about, being in the fight with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz, and that's a very different approach than somebody like Gonzalez, who's been more apt to criticize some of those, hardliner Republicans compared to the approach that Herrera has in this race.
That's right. It's not so simple as Republican or Democrat these days. Hunter Woodall, thank you so much for your time. Congress has failed to install a plaque honoring police officers who served on January 6th before the deadline required by law. Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren and a group of other top House Democrats are questioning the delay. In a letter to House Speaker Mike Johnson, she says she's, quote, deeply concerned about it. The spending bill that required the creation of the plaque was signed into law in March of last year. A U.S. court today fast-tracked a hearing on challenges to a potential ban on TikTok. The D.C. Appeals Court is set to hear oral arguments for the case in September. TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, and the Justice Department are both looking to have a ruling by December 6th. In April, President Biden signed a new law ordering the social media platform's Chinese owners to divest its U.S. assets by January 19th or face a ban. Earlier this month, TikTok creators filed a lawsuit to challenge the move. Well, that does it for today, but we'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.